Some WNBA players are known for their talent on the court, but a few have shocking pasts. From high-ranking gang ties to dangerous lifestyles, their stories go far beyond basketball. Let's get into the high-ranking WNBA gang members, starting off with Javaris Crittenton, a young man whose career seemed headed for the stars but who sank into violence and legal trouble after linking up with gang life. After being picked in the first round and landing in Los Angeles in 2007, Crittenton is said to have joined the Mansfield Gangster Crips. What had looked like a bright future in basketball became tangled with shootings and accusations that destroyed his life on and off the court. Prosecutors later named him in a string of violent incidents in Atlanta in 2011, including a case where a 22-year-old mother, Jolene Jones, died. Authorities said those shootings were connected to a dispute with a rival named Trontavious Stevens. They framed the acts as gang retaliation. Crittenton faced a long list of charges: murder, aggravated assault, weapons counts, giving false statements, and taking part in criminal street gang activity. And the legal mess stretched on for years. At times, the evidence seemed shaky. A witness initially pointed at Crittenton but later changed their story, saying they'd only picked him out after seeing a photo. Still, Crittenton eventually pled guilty to manslaughter in 2015, acknowledging gang involvement. His original sentence was heavy. It was later reduced, and he was released in April 2023. His tale is the clearest example in this collection of how deeply a professional athlete's life can collapse when they cross from promising prospect into real gang violence. Next, the focus moves to Stephen Jackson. Jackson says he grew up surrounded by the Bloods and that his ties go back to childhood. For him, the connection appears cultural and inherited rather than bureaucratic or formal. He describes an upbringing where wearing red and representing the neighborhood was just what people did. In interviews, he's admitted to having done things as a teen, selling drugs and getting caught up in the wrong crowds. But he has tried to separate representing from actively committing crimes. Still, Jackson's blunt statements about checking in with gang figures in different cities stirred controversy. After the killing of rapper PNB Rock, his comments about checking in with the real one made headlines and provoked a backlash. Some accused him of glamorizing gang life. Others argued he was only saying he respects where he came from. Jackson's story forces an awkward question. Does acknowledging your past mean you're responsible for the actions of those circles today? Or can someone accept their background and still try to do better? He seems to embrace where he came from while also trying to play down the notion that he's an active gang leader. Zach Randolph's situation shows how complicated this whole issue can be when a player's friends and entourage carry suspicious ties. Randolph became associated with a group nicknamed the Hoops Family, a crew of people from his old neighborhood who followed him when he went to Portland. Some law enforcement documents suggested members of that circle had links to the Crips and painted the group as connected to violent crime, drugs, and guns. There were specific incidents that raised eyebrows: shootings tied to acquaintances, and a large drug probe in Indiana where a confidential informant fingered Randolph as a big supplier. But criminal charges never stuck to him in that case. The allegations remained unproven. Local police officers said they paid close attention to his circle during his Portland years, and a journalist recalled cops urging him to look closely at Randolph's MTV Cribs episode for signs of trouble. He also drew trouble for things like drag racing and carrying a gun in downtown Portland. Still, with no convictions tying him directly to gang membership, his story sits in the gray zone between hanging around dangerous people and actually running with a gang. Randolph's case shows how proximity can create suspicion, even without firm proof of membership. Tony Allen's story goes back to the streets of Chicago and reflects how old ties can follow a player into the pro ranks. Allen is often connected in reports with the gangster disciples because of his Chicago upbringing, although some sources say his links point toward the Black disciples or even the Bloods. Accounts vary. A turning point came in 2005 when he was indicted on aggravated battery charges tied to a fight that ended with a shooting. He was later found not guilty in 2007. His gang background became a practical worry when the Memphis Grizzlies considered how his past might affect team chemistry. Management asked whether his disciples' past would clash with a teammate who had ties to a different set. That concern shows how, in pro sports, teams have to think not only about talent, but also the baggage players might carry. Allen's early brushes with gang culture, reportedly starting around age 14, and later incidents during his pro career, highlight the way those roots can create friction and even personal danger, such as the death threats he received when playing in his old city during the playoffs. For Allen, the past never fully disappeared. The question for observers was always how deeply he remained involved. James Harden's supposed gang ties are less clear-cut and mostly come down to gestures and associations that some fans and artists read as signals. The controversy centers on a playoff moment in 2012 when Harden flashed a hand sign some thought linked to the Bloods. Around the same time, he tweeted about seats for a celebrity friend using the number 5, which some interpreted as another coded reference. That sparked criticism from hip-hop figures who suggested he was pretending to be something he wasn't. Harden grew up in South Central Los Angeles, a place with a rough gang presence, and he's long had friendships with rappers who are believed to have gang connections. More recently, a 2024 photo of him with people tied to a music label linked to a known gang revived the chatter, but most of what's said about Harden lands in rumor territory. There's no public court record proving he's an active gang member, and many analysts who dug into the incidents argue his ties look more like social connections than criminal participation. What's striking about Harden's case is his silence. He hasn't publicly addressed these claims in a meaningful way, which lets gossip fill the void. Demar DeRozan's story shifts the tone again. He's not accused of being a gang leader or an active member, but his life illustrates how growing up in a violent, gang-dominated place can shape someone's identity and mental health. Raised in Compton, he watched friends and family fall to violence, saw uncles and relatives in and out of jail, and attended far too many funerals. For him, gang life was part of the scenery. It was what people in his neighborhood did and what made them feel accepted. That environment left scars. He has been open about the depression and survivor's guilt he carried, the losses he witnessed as a kid, and how basketball became his route out. Unlike others on this list, DeRozan used the sport to avoid turning toward the street life that surrounded him, and he credits his parents, especially his father, for keeping him focused and out of harm's way. The public discussions that question his ties usually point back to the place he came from rather than any proof of his involvement. His case highlights the difference between being raised in gang territory and choosing to be part of a gang. Paul Pierce's incident is one of the more public and controversial moments where a famous player's actions were read through a gang lens. During a playoff game in 2008, Pierce made a hand signal that some experts later identified as a gang symbol connected to subsets of the Bloods in Southern California. The NBA fined him $25,000 and made a public statement, citing the overall context and a need to act. Pierce denied any gang intent and said the motion was just part of his pregame routine, a gesture he'd done before games to psych himself up, a ritual meant to signify blood, sweat, and tears. Boston's front office defended him and suggested the league overreacted. But the story didn't help. Pierce's Englewood past and a prior stabbing incident at a nightclub years earlier only made people more suspicious. The stabbing itself raised questions at the time about whether it was gang-related, though Pierce said it was not. Overall, his episode shows how a single gesture, whether intended as ritual or provocation, can become loaded and interpreted as a signal of gang ties when combined with someone's background. Caron Butler's biography is a raw tale of a young life steeped in crime and how he turned things around. He began selling drugs as a child and lived through shootings, drive-bys, and friends being killed. Arrested many times before he was even a teenager, Butler faced real danger and was involved in reckless behavior. He once accidentally shot himself at a high school dance. His early life reads like a catalog of street survival, but he also made a genuine transformation. After a stint in youth detention, he found basketball, got a college scholarship, and eventually got drafted into the NBA. He has been frank about the mistakes he made and uses his own story as a warning for others. As a pro, Butler drew praise for using his experience constructively. In one notable moment, his street credibility helped calm a locker room gun incident between teammates. People from outside his world, athletes and entertainers, praised his turnaround and the example he set. Butler's past was dangerous and extreme, but his life also shows how sport, mentors, and family support can pull someone away from that path. Derrick Rose's controversy centers on a badly timed photo and a quick public apology. As a young player in Memphis, Rose was photographed flashing a sign that some read as linked to the gangster Disciples. He immediately said it was a dumb joke and firmly denied being part of any gang. Rose released a statement calling himself anti-gang and anti-violence and blamed inexperience and poor judgment. Given his background in Chicago's Englewood, where gang presence is strong, people understood why the image triggered concern. Still, Rose has long used his success to try to help the community he came from, setting up scholarship programs and paying for funerals of victims. And many reporters and fans accepted his explanation and focused on his career and charity work rather than the photo. Rose's case shows how a single image can spark years of gossip, but also how a player's choices afterward, the work they do for their neighborhood, can change the narrative. Taken together, these stories make the same point from different angles. The line between growing up around gangs and being an active gang member is often blurry, and the consequences can be very different depending on the choices people make. Some players find their names attached to violent acts and legal records. Others carry the weight of their past as a warning and a motivator to help their communities. For some, membership is clear and leads to prison and tragedy. For others, association was a product of proximity, friends, family, and neighborhood, without the formal organizational role that would make them criminals in the eyes of the law. Toward the end of this rundown, the topic turns to a more recent and very public athlete, Angel Reese. She isn't part of the older narratives about gang membership that dominated the earlier stories. Instead, she represents how modern athletes' personas and the way they present themselves can lead to chatter and rumor online. Reese rose to fame quickly and developed a tough, confident on-court image that some people online have read as street or hard. Social media users sometimes try to link present behavior or attitude to past or hidden affiliations, and Reese, like many current players, has been subject to that kind of speculation. It's important to stress that online gossip is not the same as evidence. There's no public proof that Reese has any gang ties, and including her here mostly shows how conversation about athletes and authenticity plays out in the internet age. Her case highlights a new phenomenon. Instead of the legal records and police files that defined earlier examples, today's debates often swirl from memes, tweets, and fan interpretations of swagger and cultural style. Across every profile, the stories are defined by context, where someone grew up, who they hung out with, and how they chose to express themselves all influence how the world reads them. Some players were legally tied to gang crimes and paid for it with freedom and reputation. Others simply endured the violence of their neighborhoods and used basketball as an escape. Still others walked a middle line, surrounded by suspicion without the court-tested evidence to convict them of gang membership. And the newest stars show just how quickly perception can morph into accusation in an online culture that loves to label and sensationalize. Ultimately, these are human stories about places where childhoods were shaped by fear, where loyalty and identity were complicated by survival, and where the path out was a basketball court. The difference between becoming a cautionary tale and becoming a community leader often came down to choices, whether to stay loyal to a violent code or to seek a different life. For some, those choices ended in tragedy and long prison terms. For others, they brought redemption and the chance to give back. And for those who live in the public eye now, the court of public opinion can be as dangerous as any street corner, because a gesture, a photo, or a comment can turn into a headline and a lifetime of questions.